My proposed levy furthers Seattle's commitment to a world-class library system. The $410 million proposal will provide critical investments in hours and access, programming, collections, building maintenance and capital needs, and technology and online services through 2033.
Well, turn the page. A whole new Seattle library levy is coming your way. Looks like it will be on the ballot in August, and we are learning this week it is substantially higher than what Seattleites have paid in the past. Plus, there's a new plan to respond to Seattle's homelessness crisis from Mayor Katie Wilson. What kind of impact could that proposal have? And also, the latest on a backlog of cases that have saddled the city attorney's office for years. These stories and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am with my friend and co-host, David Croman of the Seattle Times, City Hall reporter there. David, I saw this post of yours from a couple of days ago around daylight savings time, the big switch there. There's always this wave of support every year for people who just want to stay with maybe like standard time year-round. You are not a fan of that idea. What gives?
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine waiting until 9 a.m. until the sun comes up. Obviously, I'm a little biased right now because I have kids who wake up early, and even waiting till like 8 something feels like torture sometimes.
Yes.
So, I acknowledge that this is kind of dependent on whether you're a morning or evening person.
Yeah, I got it. I kind of like that sun coming up a little earlier, too. I need it, definitely, during the year. Yeah. Well, thank you, David, as always. And thanks to everybody, including our patrons, including Julie, who just jumped on board. So be cool like Julie, folks. Be a patron. Giving levels start at just $5 per month. That's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Thanks also for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version of the show is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. And a big thanks to our show sponsor, Phillips Law Firm. Phillips attorneys know this community because they live here, too. After a car accident, they fight for their neighbors and the people who call Washington home. Call 1-800-JUSTICE or visit justiceforyou.com. Phillips Law Firm, unleashing justice for you. All right, let's roll. Time for Right Here, Right Now. David, here we go. We discussed the lack of levy capacity for the city of Seattle last week on the podcast, and this week we're getting the details on a new library levy. This is the one that expires this year. It was a $219.1 million levy. The new 7-year measure that Mayor Wilson is proposing this week is $410 million. That's about an 87% increase, if I'm doing the math right there. Before we get into what this is going to pay for, were you surprised at the size of this levy? It is a pretty big increase. It doesn't take all the levy room that was left, but a good portion of it. Some thoughts on this proposal?
No, I wasn't surprised, only because every levy proposal that I can remember has been bigger than the one before it.
Right.
And, the library has a lot of really legitimate needs. I'm sure they could have spent quite a bit more than this. But by my math, I think if you kind of adjust for inflation, it's maybe like a 50% increase. I think compared to 219, maybe it's in that 80% range. But I think inflation would have put the 2019 number more around like 280 or something like that.
I see. Okay.
So, but, still not opting for just a straight renewal, which they could have done.
Yeah.
It's not surprising. I think the library is very popular. The last levy passed with 76% support. I think they're still sort of trying to get their feet back under them from the pandemic, and are I know for a fact that they have a lot of pretty intense maintenance and upkeep needs. And, I think there's also a sense of, at a time when perhaps public spaces aren't as widely shared, there's not as many, quote, third places. I think the library is taking on greater significance as a community gathering space. And, frankly, it picks up a lot of slack of social services, too. There's just, it's an open public space, and social services have not kept up with some of the needs, particularly after the pandemic. And I think the library has taken on a lot of that role. And so, no, it's not. It doesn't surprise me. It does pose some complications for future priorities around what kind of levies might get passed and who else wants money. But no, I wouldn't say it surprises me.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what they're going to do with the room they have left, that's for sure. But I did want to talk about just where this levy is positioned in terms of library funding, because the levy committee met this week not only to discuss the growing size of the levy, but the growing amount that Seattle libraries depend on this levy. So in 2026, 34.3% of the budget comes from the levy. So more than a third of the library's budget banking on this levy. And I was just going to ask, David, where the council might adjust this proposal, maybe take away some of the open hours or add to that or add technology, any of these other things. Maybe the city can't afford to cut back on this levy. Maybe it needs to add more. I just wanted to talk about how reliant the libraries are now on this levy. That's more than a third of their budget, and I think that's significant. I wonder if the council is going to make any significant changes to this proposal, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know that they will. Councilmember Rivera was at the proposal and was there in support. I'm sure they'll make some tweaks here and there. I don't remember the last time a council made a levy smaller. They've made it bigger before. And that piece about how big of a part of the budget this levy is for the library, I think that is a part of a kind of broader trend in Seattle, which is that these levies, and in part why we're so close to this limit, is that these levies have really taken on a role in the city's budget that, in theory, they're not supposed to be doing. Levies are kind of imagined as, hey, we've got our baseline services. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got our baseline services. We want a little extra money from the voters to do this one specific thing. But when you look at the Department of Transportation, which I think about a third of their levy comes from, or a third of their budget comes from the levy, basically the Office of Housing is largely funded by the housing levy. It is sort of starting to get to a point where it's hard to make the case that these levies are not serving the basic function of what the city's budget's supposed to be. Yeah. The real risk is you get into this habit where, that you pass a levy that funds the libraries, and then that makes it easier for mayors or city councils to come in and take some of the library's budget to plug general fund holes. And the real risk is you turn these levies into slush funds. The mayor, I asked the mayor about that today, actually. She said, this is additive. It's not supplanting kind of general fund obligations. But again, there's a lot of budget tricks you could play to make that true in theory, but still kind of open up some of those budget holes for the taking. And I think it's a real, I would say that some people, in City Hall would point to the 1% cap from Tim Eyman on the growth of their budget and say, frankly, this is the only way we can continue to keep up with the needs of the city. But it does kind of put it in a position where it almost feels like some of these departments are being held hostage, which is like, if you don't pass this levy, we're going to have to gut a third of the education department. That's not really how these levies were imagined to be originally.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's interesting to watch that change there. And the DOT, I just looked up the number. It is about 30%. So you're right. There's a number of departments that are very dependent on these levies. I wanted to track another story with you, David, this week about automated license plate readers. So the Public Safety Committee reviewed a draft ordinance about ALPRs. This was sponsored by Councilmember Alexis Mercedes Rink, who is working with Councilmember Kettle on this. She's actually voiced her concerns about surveillance cameras quite a bit, but this ordinance she is proposing gives the city the same ability to hit the pause button on these license plate readers as they've been able to do with closed-circuit TVs as of last year, those closed-circuit cameras there. A 60-day delay if this information is used for civil immigration enforcement or enforcement against reproductive health care. It was interesting to me, David, to see Rink and Kettle team up on this one. I wanted to talk about that and what you make of this bill.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. Rink and Kettle, and Kettle isn't necessarily politically aligned with everybody on the council, but my sense is those two get along, and Kettle's pretty friendly with most of the council, and he's always been willing to, he's got a bit of an independent streak. He's always been willing to collaborate with whomever and buck whomever when it calls for that. I think Kettle, this license plate reader technology and the surveillance technology sort of more broadly, it's very important to Kettle. I think he's also politically smart enough to understand some of the concerns around it. And so I think teaming up with Rink to put in these parameters makes some amount of sense because he's, acknowledging, he's not denying some of the concerns. He's acknowledging them. He's working with the chief proponent of scaling back some surveillance technology, while also, maintaining his outspoken support for it.
Yeah. Another thought here, after all the concern over surveillance raised by Rink, raised by other council members too, did you expect to see more than just this 60-day delay come out of this? I'm just trying to figure out, Is there anything else the council could have done to speak to those concerns about privacy, et cetera? Or is a 60-day delay kind of the best case scenario coming out of this? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I don't know, because you're talking about data protection and that is just really difficult to wrap your arms around
Yeah.
because there tends to be middle companies
Yeah.
that handle a lot of this information, and there's no, again, as we've talked about, if legal subpoenas and warrants still have power, and there's
Yeah.
only so much you can do in the face of those. So it is for the city of Seattle, it's if they collect the information, it is to an extent going to be vulnerable. And so the only, if you want a truly 100% guarantee that it will not be used for immigration purposes, really the only way to do that is to not collect the information in the first place.
Yeah. And
That, of
some
course,
some cities around the state are doing that. They're
Yeah.
turning off their cameras right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the 60-day pause is the compromise they've come up with. I again, this is, I think we hear a lot about the concerns around immigration enforcement. There were a few people in city council chambers who were talking about, you don't take away the surveillance from us. These were folks who were representing Rainier Valley.
Sure.
And we're talking about how important that these cameras and surveillance were for the health and safety of their children in
Sure.
part of the city that sees a lot of gun violence. And, again, it's hard to say no in the face of someone who's saying, for the safety of my child, please use this surveillance technology.
Right.
I think that's what we're seeing with Mayor Wilson and why it has proven not to be quite so easy as she made it sound on the campaign trail around whether or not it's a yes or no on CCTV cameras. So I think that's why this 60-day pause is kind of the settled upon solution, because it gives them the opportunity to continue to use them, and then an out if there's ever any whiff that this information was misused.
Yeah. All right. Well, up next, a plan from Mayor Katie Wilson on how to make an impact on the homelessness crisis. What is she aiming for? How's this plan going to work? Some analysis next on Now Hear This. Well, Mayor Katie Wilson is working to go where no Seattle mayor has gone before, to add 1,000 new shelter beds this year and then 4,000 over the course of her term. It's a bold move on homelessness, with some echoes of the promises mayors before her have made ever since Seattle and King County declared a homelessness emergency back in 2015.
For many years, and through multiple mayoral administrations, we have not treated this crisis with the urgency that it demands. That pattern ends here with all of us.
David, you reported on this for the Seattle Times, and Mayor Wilson has a three-pronged plan I wanted to look at here. Apparently, there was $5 million for programs in housing and human services programs that were underutilized. She wants to use those dollars towards this. She also wants to expand the number of people allowed to live in tiny homes from 100 to 150, so add some capacity there. And then finally, she wants to allow the city to sign its own leases on property to be used for shelter, so not going through an extra process with the Regional Homelessness Authority and nonprofit service providers here. I know the mayor was talking a lot about us in this pitch when she was making it here, David. How does she pull it off, and who is she going to need to lean on to try to make this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first piece is, I think we've talked about before, I think for years there has been this sort of back and forth around where time and energy is best spent. Is it around kind of permanent housing, or is it around emergency shelter?
Right.
Obviously the risk of emergency transitional shelter is it does not stay that way, that it becomes de facto permanent housing if people can't move out of it.
Right.
Of course, the risk of permanent housing is it takes a really long time to build and it's really expensive.
Yeah.
Wilson, I think the big, up front, the big philosophical change is that Wilson is going all in on emergency transitional shelter.
And does that take away from the push for permanent housing? Is that how you look at that, or what's your take?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it depends on where you're looking. Certain past leaders of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority would say, yeah, probably. I think the argument, though, is, if you could actually make a real difference in the number of encampments and visible homelessness, that might buy you time and political will to go back and do the longer, slower processes. I think the money piece is, $5 million. It's not a ton of money, and it's going to be fiercely fought over. The council isn't going to just hand that over to the mayor without some scrutiny. And the 100 to 150 piece, it's unclear to me how many encampments right now are truly functioning at that 100 capacity with room to expand more. They say that there are a few, but I don't know. I do think probably the most significant piece is the fact that Seattle is saying they want to sign their own leases because
Yeah,
as of right now, it's
what does
basic.
that mean? What does that mean to be able to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, right now they would have to basically go through the King County Regional Homelessness Authority to find the money to start the process.
Hmm.
And then there would be like a grant process that would contract with nonprofits. And then it would be the obligation of those nonprofits to find and prepare their sites. So
I
have their
see.
sites ready, but they have to go through all the permitting process. The city here is saying, we're working on finding a few sites. We don't want to go through all that. We want to sign the lease on those sites, go through all the process that you need to get it ready. And then once that's done, say, okay, who wants this property?
Yeah.
Lehigh or whoever can raise their hand and
Yep.
basically start operations right away.
Okay.
The hope is, they were saying that the previous process could take like a year. They are hoping to get shelter online in basically 2 to 3 months before the World Cup. They think
Yeah,
that's how much
right.
more quickly they can bring things online with this new process.
Right.
It is dependent on them finding those pieces of land that they think are usable. Probably worth pointing out that John Grant, who used to work for the Low Income Housing Institute, which is the kind of main operator of tiny home villages, now works for Katie Wilson. So if anybody kind of knows how this process goes, it's probably him. So, of the three, I think that piece has the chance maybe to make a real difference more than perhaps the other two.
Got it. And just with the dollars, I know there's been some chatter about potentially a capital gains tax or something along those lines to try to put some more money towards homelessness for the mayor here. Do you think that's going to be rolled out anytime soon, or maybe try to prove the concept with this idea of leasing land and then ask for some dollars? Or where do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, I think it could come out this year. I think there's also an acknowledgement that the woes of the city, the troubles facing the city right now, particularly around budgets and promises of shelter,
Yeah.
aren't going to be solved by a capital gains tax, even if it were to pass. It would take months and months of deliberations to pass, and then implementation is going to be slow. So it's not going to be, that will not be a 2026 solution, and there are 2026 problems.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, next up, I did want to talk about a few more public safety issues here. So the full council passed this bill that we discussed a few weeks ago, David, to put a moratorium on building detention centers in the city, this in anticipation of federal immigration activity picking up. The council also approved in committee this plan to prohibit civil immigration enforcement staging on city property. David, is the city as prepared as it can be to respond to federal immigration activity in Seattle? It looks like they've been working on a lot of these different pieces here on the last couple of weeks. What do you think about what they've been doing, and what else can be done?
It's a good question. Again, there's always the acknowledgement that federal immigration officers can function wherever they want, and you really can't do anything to stop that. The detention moratorium, that's responding to this kind of vague posting on the federal government's website, calling it a pre-solicitation notice, essentially requesting industry feedback on the possible construction of detention space in Seattle. It's unclear if that would be a Seattle area, perhaps an expansion to the Tacoma facility, or they're actually talking about a new building, whatever it might be. That's really what this is responding to. It's become a pretty common tactic. King County passed a similar moratorium. SeaTac, Tukwila, sounds like Pierce County is considering something along those lines too. Again, I think to the extent that immigration enforcement wants to operate here, they're going to do that. I don't know how much of a difference all of these collective measures make, but the city is putting itself in a position where no one can claim that they have not kind of turned over every stone when it comes to immigration enforcement.
Yeah, to work on that. And here's where I'm really hoping for a crystal ball here, David. Is it the time to expect more federal immigration activity locally? Because I'm thinking about Kristi Noem, the head of the Department for Homeland Security, been overseeing these operations. She's been removed from her role. And of course, the U.S. is at war with Iran. I did hear the president say last month he had 5 more cities on his list, places he wanted to target with additional immigration enforcement. Do you have any idea? Do you see that happening anytime soon? I just wanted to think about that.
Not in the way that it happened in Minneapolis, I don't think. I mean, that was just really unpopular and didn't go well. Yeah. But I think if there was something, it would be they'd probably keep it as a more gradual ramp up. So I don't know the answer to that. But I doubt we would see something so forward as we saw in Minneapolis. But I think, we see the Trump administration in the past have tested certain things out. I can't think of examples right now, but tested certain things out that Oh, I guess the ban on people coming in from Muslim
Yeah.
majority
Right.
countries. The first Trump administration tried this big dramatic push. It got all this protests. They backed off of it, but now it's essentially been reinstated. But they just did it in a more kind of subtle and slow way, and it didn't meet the same level of pushback. So, to the extent that there is increased immigration enforcement here, I would think it would follow perhaps a similar trajectory, which is they try and avoid the broad backlash of Minneapolis, but and do it in a more kind of quiet and subtle way, but try and accomplish basically the same thing.
Yeah, I looked at the number just today. I believe there are 38 countries that are on a travel ban right now in terms of going back and forth to the U.S. So that's something to think about there. Thank you for that, David. All right, well, coming up, another age-old Seattle problem, a backlog of cases for the city attorney's office. How is the new city attorney, Erica Evans, dealing with this issue? That story just ahead on What's Next. David, we're talking about the Seattle city attorney and a case backlog, roughly 5,000 cases, depending on who you talk to. It makes me think of the Seattle mayor and making promises on homelessness. These are issues that have definitely been around for a while. I was reading about this in Publicola. Here's what new city attorney Erica Evans is dealing with. First, 400 languishing DUI cases. There's a new state law that could speed up toxicology testing. It's been a big holdup, so that could be a push there. She's also talking about adding more prosecutors. She wants to do that. Probably kind of tough in the budget crunch Seattle's going through. We'll have to see. But she's also working to reorganize her office, she says, so city attorneys will work from filing a case all the way through resolution. David, I know we're talking about rough terms just starting here. Is this backlog going away anytime soon? What do you think of these proposals from Erica Evans?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, you've got this it would require a lot of diversion, a lot of streamlining. I think, frankly, it would require some changes at Seattle Municipal Court, too. There are still caps at that level of how many judges you can actually have working, which is kind of a relic of a bygone era, and does not apply to other courts to have this limit on the number of judges that can be working at any given moment. So, that's an issue, too, is that you just, the whole system is kind of backlogged. And yeah, I think the legislation in Olympia probably will make a difference, but it'll take some time to get up and running. And, toxicology dependent cases are only a certain portion.
Right.
A lot of them are going to be these drug possession cases. And, again, the hope is that they do more diversions, but you can only do so many of those. So
yeah,
I do think there's a reason why Pete Holmes has these backlogs.
Yeah.
He had first Scott Lindsay campaign against him and then Ann Davison campaign against him, saying how terrible it is that these backlogs exist, only for the backlogs to continue to exist. So when that happens, you do have to acknowledge that there's probably just some realities about how the system works that are going to be pretty difficult to get around. Scott in the Publicola piece said they have maybe a different calculations for how many exactly are qualify as being backlogged. But at the end of the day, he said, yes, that backlog is growing. He acknowledged that.
It was growing when she left office. And just with that budget piece in particular, I know that former City Attorney Davison did manage to get about $300,000 out of the city for 2 additional domestic violence prosecutors back 4 years ago. But again, we've talked about this on the podcast, Mayor Wilson's asking each department to really consider cuts between 5 and 10%. Do you see the city council putting more funding into this office? There's so many different budget priorities out there. Is this going to meet that mark? Or more dollars going to go to the city attorney?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think you probably have a pretty supportive council because, of course, part of the council is still very public safety oriented, but that at the same time, other members who maybe weren't elected on quite as strong of public safety platforms are close with Erica Evans. So she has allies on kind of across the council. So maybe I'm sure there would be an appetite for it. Again, though, you just can't really know until they're actually into these budget discussions because, there's going to be a fight for every last dollar.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. All right, well, it is time to wrap up here, and I've got a big baseball question of the week here, David. Are Cal Raleigh and Randy Arozarena really mad at each other? Because it kind of seems so in the World Baseball Classic. What do you got, man?
Yeah, I don't know. This feels like one of those stories where we need like the season to start or something.
Yeah. I know.
Is it a real one? My guess is it's like either they're screwing around or somebody on the USA team has made some policy about how it's, us against the world and shaking hands, and Cal kind of followed it. I doubt that I saw that Cal said Randy and him don't have any beef. I haven't heard Randy's side of it yet, but
Yeah,
you know.
I know. It just sometimes you look at Cal Raleigh and he's got his eyebrows put together. He looks like one of the most innocent-faced baseball players. Like he's a slugger. He crushes balls like
Yeah.
490 feet, but he's one of the nicest-looking gentlemen around, and just a
Yeah,
nice guy.
exactly.
It's
Exactly.
it's tough for me to believe that he has beef with anybody.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see when the season gets started here, David, and more input on that as we go along here. Thank you, David. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Become a patron, please, like Julie. Thanks a lot for doing that. Please check out Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Pledge $5 a month or more, and thank you for that support. It's great to have you listening to this podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you are tuning in. And thanks to our 9 listeners in Mexico one more time. Really appreciate you supporting the show. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2026.